Well, thank you everybody for coming. I want to start by acknowledging that we are meeting on Wurundjeri country and pay my respects to elders past and present. I want to extend that acknowledgement to all other Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders who are with us in the room today. I want to do a really short reflection because it's Homelessness Week on the overrepresentation of Aboriginal Victorians in the homelessness service system and echo the words of our elder Tony Garvey, who gave a welcome yesterday that we must all get together and stand behind the treaty to ensure that we can get some equity in this country. Thank you everybody so much for coming today. I also particularly want to acknowledge the Minister who is with us today, Minister Harriet Shing, Minister for Homelessness. And can I say, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but we've both been doing so many events in Homelessness Week that I said, how are you feeling? She said, a bit like you, it's like a Kentucky tour. Where are we? Hawaii? What are we doing today? Is it young people? So it's really, we've both been incredibly excited about this event in particular. At Council to Homeless Persons, we are really, really strong advocates in relation to our workforce. As the peak, we do two things. One of them is to advocate for better policy outcomes for people experiencing homelessness, but the other one is to ensure that we've got a sector that is strong and sustainable into the future. We wouldn't have been able to do this piece of work without our community of practice, and many of you are here today, and I want to thank you for responding to our emails about your needs and what you want to see change. I also particularly want to thank you for coming here, Tom, and representing the department. I want to thank the department for the funding that they gave us to do this really important piece of research. So the workforce report that soon I will introduce you to the Director of WIDI, David Clements, who will give you a step-by-step guide on the findings. It's nothing new. It's stuff that we already know, but what's more important is that the problem is bigger than we thought it was, so it's always good for us to take stock of that. But what is also more important is what are the solutions into the future, and we'll talk a little bit to both of those. So on that, I'll invite you to give us a summary of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb, and thanks everybody for your attendance. First acknowledgement for me is obviously echoing Deb, acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation and pay my respect to elders past, present and any other Indigenous Victorians or Australians we might have here with us. The second acknowledgement I want to make, so I don't forget it in my haste to get through this slide presentation for you, is particularly to the team at both at CHP, Deb and her team, for the assistance they've given, but particularly the team here at WIDI. A number of our staff have contributed to the report that I'm about to take you through, but in particular, Chris Hallekus. I would love to acknowledge Chris. Chris is the brains and the passion behind this report. It's been a long journey for Chris, and he's become, we refer to this as the Hallekus method now. And I've comforted him by telling him that all those thankless hours of work will one day lead to a lucrative consulting career somewhere else. But if we do happen to lose him, people would gain an excellent... Well, Chris can hand out cards to anyone here who might be interested in his services. No, but thanks, Chris. It's been a long road to come to this point because it's been a really complex task, and so it's a bit of work that we've been learning as we've gone, and it's a really important thing to be doing, I think. I'm going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour through this report. I can't do it justice in 20 minutes, and you wouldn't want me to do it justice because you'd be here for a very long time. But I really encourage you to download it when it's available and have a good look at it. There's lots of methodology discussion in it, and it's really important to position the report as what it is and what it isn't. It's a bit of a first of its kind. It's a really complex report, and it's given us, I completely concur with what Deb said, a lot of it's not new news, but it's definitely given us new insights and new ways of thinking about the problem, and I think it's a really significant contribution. It'd be remiss of me not to give WIDI a bit of a plug. We're all about workforce. We're part of RMIT University, obviously. Our focus is the community and social services workforce. And without reading through our mission and vision and ambition, the thing that underpins what we do is this concept of social innovation. And I think in really simple terms, if you're dealing with a wicked problem, an entrenched problem, if you keep doing the stuff you've been doing, you're going to keep having the problem, right? You need to start thinking about things a little bit differently. And to do that, you've got to experiment and test and trial. And a big part of the thing we need to do better here is to have a better sense of what is the workforce, what do they look like, what are the challenges we're facing. And it helps government, and it's brilliant to have you here, Minister, and your colleagues. It gives government an opportunity to make much more strategic and meaningful investments about the thing, and I think have the courage to try things that may or may not work as we're trying to deal with this really complex challenge that the workforce presents. Quick history of the background, and Deb sort of shared this. It's been a really great partnership with CHP and the specialist homelessness sector. Started a long time ago with this, the transition plan work that the current government in one of its earlier iterations funded. Which really identified, hey, we've got to know more about the workforce and we've got to know more about who they are and what we can do. Transitioned then into a really strategic piece of work that, again, Chris was involved in partnership with CHP about a workforce survey and the work and what we needed to know there. And that report said, hey, it's great to have surveys. Surveys are really important, but they've all got limitations. What other sources of data and information are there that are broader, richer, deeper, and more, and also available over time with a longitudinal aspect that creates opportunities for us to compare and make comparisons between different industries, different workforces. At the time, that thing was called MADIP. It's, it's had a rebrand now to PLIDA, neither of which are particularly compelling acronyms, but, I would have come up with something a bit different. But nevertheless, the key thing here is we've landed here today with this report, with our suitably trendy-looking community and social service workforce person gracing the cover, and it's a report that's been informed by PLIDA. And the key thing you need to know about PLIDA is it's a massive national data set. 30 million plus people are in that data set, billions of data points, and there is almost no end of things that you could start to try to find out in completely appropriate ways about the workforce and about what their needs are and what their experiences are. This is a quick, totally superficial outline of what we do. As I said before, you've got to get into the report to really understand the methodologies. But in simple terms, in working in partnership with Homes Vic, the department at the time, we started with the ABNs of 107 organisations that are funded by the Victorian Government to deliver specialist homelessness services. That's every organisation in the state that's funded to deliver that. Some of those organisations, that's all they do. Homelessness is their focus. Some of them do a mix of different things, and you can see in the blue column down the side there what some of those mixes are. I think it's interesting, but it's a side product of the work we do, but even just looking at the fact that half the organisations deliver both family violence and specialist homelessness services, half don't, tells us something about the structure of our system, not for today, but it tells us something about notions of client experience and client pathways into supports and services. And, it's yet again one of many millions of things that you can potentially learn more about the workforce and the service system with a deeper, richer understanding of the data and the way that our system's set up and structured. The key thing you also need to know really is that we were able to find information. And I want to make this really clear, not only on the specialist homelessness services workforce that's employed by these 107 organisations, but by everyone who's employed by those organisations. And whilst that means we haven't been able to narrow specifically down to only that workforce, we have in fact done some work when you read the report, used different methodologies to narrow it down closely to the specialist homelessness workforce. But what we've also got is this story about the experiences not just of frontline specialist homelessness workers, but back office people and frontline people from other industries. Surprise, surprise, I think you'd probably know that there's a lot of similarity depending, regardless of what part of the sector you work in. Why wouldn't there be when people who come to homelessness services are also going to have AOD challenges, mental health challenges, issues around family violence. So, it's a really significant contribution, an enormous database to start to mine. This is superficial. I'll keep saying that, but let's just quickly go through. I wanted to start with the positives, right? Because we've got to remind ourselves, this is an incredible workforce. The organisations that commit themselves to this work, the people who commit themselves to working in this career are somewhat heroic. I'm as an aside, and Tom will laugh here, I have this sort of sample of one being my partner, who is a social worker. And one of the things that enrages her the most is every time there's a wonderful ad about the contribution that nurses make or police make, she goes, what about social workers? No one ever talks about social workers and what we do, you know, and I think there's some truth in that. But the really positive findings, enormous numbers of people who pursue a career in it. Everybody knows you're not going to make $1 million if you work in welfare, right? But there's been something like a 40% jump in enrolments in community service type courses in TAFEs over the last 4 or 5 years. People want to work in these sectors, in these areas. They want to do good. They want to help others. What you'll see later in the report, there's been massive growth in the size of the workforce across those 107 organisations over the last 5 years. And that's a credit, I think, to the Victorian government and their investment in a whole range of services, from family violences and so on and so forth. Interestingly, we couldn't find any evidence that the growth in homelessness support services mirrored the larger growth in other sectors. And that's an interesting finding, which we need to do a little bit more digging on as well. Another positive that we find, there's a coarse group of people who hang into this industry. They hang around for years because they devote themselves to it. As we'll see, there's a group that leave pretty quickly as well, but that's a different matter. It's a young workforce. We'll go through this in a bit more detail quickly, but you've got a big group of people who have got a lot of their careers left in front of them. And they're there working, aged between 30 and 49, which are now prime working age, which I left behind a long time ago, so I'm somewhat offended by that definition of the prime working age, but it's still a really important thing. Highly educated, really highly educated workforce, with lots of people still training, bettering, getting master's degrees, getting PhDs. So what you've got is a really solid platform, this is right across multiple sectors, of skilled, committed, educated workers supported by committed, values-led organisations. But what we're about to see now is, there's a big question, are we squandering that platform? What do we actually do to grow and foster that platform? Too much detail, don't worry, all this detail's in the report when you get to see it, but some of these things I've touched on already. Young workforce, look at that diploma and advanced diploma, 9 in 10 people versus 5 in 10. The right-hand column is the Victorian workforce, sorry, and then the left-hand column with the numbers is us. Huge levels of postgrad quals, very, very feminised workforce, which we know. And that's got implications, which we'll come to a bit later as well. Indigenous workers, pretty good representation in small and medium organisations, less so in large organisations. We had a lot of ACOs in this survey. That probably explains a lot of that 10% figure, which is great, but they're ACOs, predominantly. I think this is interesting. We're a bit more Anglo / non-culturally diverse than the rest of the Victorian workforce. I think when I've talked to people about that, a lot of people have gone, yeah, we've always known that. It's a very, very kind of white profession, if you like. Interesting, though, to see some of these stats. And I think that creates both an opportunity for us as well as a challenge for us. So let's get into some of the other key findings about what we know about the workforce. Double the rate of the Victorian workforce of workers with caring responsibilities outside work, whether it's kids, non-childcare, disabled family members, older family members. Massive surprise there, given the feminised nature of the workforce? Probably not. It reflects a whole lot of things about our society. But it's still a really interesting impost and may or may not be related to the next one there. Double the rate of self-reported anxiety and depression amongst the workforce to the rest of the workforce. Lots of reasons for that. I'm not trying to unpack it, but you can imagine what some of the contributing factors to that are. The part-time question, it's interesting. Well, overall, more people sort of work part-time than in other parts of the workforce. Again, perhaps a reflection of the gendered, the nature of the gender breakup of the workforce. And the income is kind of around about the state average, which is sort of going, oh, it's not too bad. But think about that qualification data I mentioned before, the number of people with not just degrees, but postgraduate degrees and so on and so forth. Again, as Deb said, none of this is new, but it's really interesting, I think, to have it sort of called out. Some more key findings, and we'll get into this one in a little bit more detail. Turnover's high in every role, but it's up to 26% in frontline roles in smaller organisations. I had a quick chat to Wayne from Waze before, and talking about the great work he's obviously done with reducing turnover in his organisation. But the reality is that even in his organisation, those frontline workers are the ones who are feeling the pinch. Those 107 organisations recruited more than 11,000 people in 2021. That's a truckload of people, right? That's out of a workforce of a bit under 40,000, right? Reinforces, there's no shortage of people who want to work in here, right? But at the same time, we lost 8,000 in the same year, right? So is it an attraction problem? Look, it's probably a bit of an attraction problem, isn't it? But it's a retention problem as well. The cost of turnover is enormous. We come to that. And whilst we didn't get data on vacancies from Plighter, we can't get it from that. But, you know, we've got different surveys saying 8%, 5 to 12%, depending on the organisational size. Inevitably, vacancy rates are going to be high when you're losing 26% of your frontline staff every year, right? And all that turnover stuff has some system implications. I mentioned this already, 26% turnover amongst the... So that right-hand column, I'll just mention this. That's the bit where we, in our methodology, if you read the report, we said let's zero in on smaller organisations and let's look at social workers, welfare support workers and counsellors. So that's where that 26% figure is. But you can see admin, 20%, 21%, that sort of range. There's still a lot of turnover in other roles. Don't worry about the fact you're not going to be able to read this slide. Again, it's in the report. But look at the green bar, right? Because the green bar of those so I mentioned 8,000 people left in 2021, right? That green bar is the people who, when they left, they didn't go and get another job. You know, they didn't move from Waze to another homelessness agency. They left in the employment of those 107 organisations. Now, they might still be working as social workers somewhere else, but they're working as social workers in an organisation that does not deliver specialist homelessness services, right? Because we've captured all of them. So we're losing knowledge, we're losing skills, we're losing colleagues, okay? And I think that's a really interesting, one of the bits of work that Chris is really keen to explore is where do these people go? Where does this enormous proportion of people who leave these organisations end up? Again, don't worry about the detail of the slide. Look at the trend. So this is the growth in numbers of humans who work in the area, which again, I acknowledged earlier is a reflection of certainly the current government and its investment in a range of different services. And I think the average growth tops out around 7, 8, 9%, something like that year on year. Now, some of that, there'll be little quirks in the data there, bit of transition of disability workers to some of these organisations potentially, stuff like that. But the story's pretty clear. More people working. And again, as I said, the specialist homelessness services sector, though, much more like a flat trend rather than a jumping up trend. Growth seemed to be in other sectors. But again, attracting people, we're bringing them through. But look at those mauve bars down the bottom. That's where they're leaking out the bottom. And it brings us to the notion of this cost of turnovers, and there's many ways to look at cost. There's a financial cost for organisations. We made use of a calculator that DFFH use for when they're doing their rough estimates. It's on the Business Vic website if you like. It works out at about 10 grand, you know, per person, right? However many staff you want to flick it up. If we've got, and I know there's some debate around how many people actually work in specialist homeless services, we used $4,000 because some will be part-time, some will be full-time, etc., etc. That's costing $20 million a year based on that estimate. When you look at other calculators, some calculators have costs much higher than that when you lose a person. It all depends a bit on location, it depends on how long it takes to fill them up and all these other things. It doesn't matter if it's $20 million, $30 million or $15 million, it's huge. You know, we're spending so much money on this. There's financial cost. Beyond that though, we all know this, the remaining staff, they wear the burden. They're a 4-person team. They're 1 person down. One of the 3 who left has to jump up and be the supervisor now because the supervisor just left as well. Yeah, you know, is there a connection with double the rate of self-reported anxiety and depression? Possibly. I'm not saying it's causal, but you know, there's pressures in work. Anyone who works in the area knows this. But you lose your colleagues, you lose the expertise, you lose the knowledge. Service users. I've got another new worker. I used to be a child protection worker many years ago, and of course that constant refrain of, oh God, I've had 7 child protection workers in the last year. You know, that sort of stuff, right? Happens in the homelessness sector as well, obviously. Dealing with really sensitive issues where, particularly people being case managed, you know, that relationship that you build with a case manager is so vital, and that gets lost. And for government as well, it hampers their policy ambitions and ideals. We saw the Treasurer at the budget presentation at VCOS talk very openly about the fact that workforce challenges in early childhood, workforce challenges in mental health were one of the main drivers for needing to pull back some of those reform ambitions. It's a very real thing, and it's a thing that's been with us for a long time, and sort of no one wins, obviously, from the turnover, which we all know. And it begs the question, we've known this for a long time, and the beauty of this report, it tells us this has been a thing for a long time. We all knew that, but we have to ask ourselves, what do we do with it? So, last bits from me, and apologies if I've gone a bit too quickly, Deb, I'll get through these. We've got some ideas, and I know that the panel are going to have some ideas as well. In simple terms, this slide's saying we're dealing with a wicked problem here, right? Wicked problems you don't deal with just by pumping more of the same into, right? You've got to start trying different things, little things. And there's a really simple, pragmatic message in this. And, you know, I've talked to people about this in the disability sector. Let's take the disability sector and move from here. The NDIA is not about to double the price they pay for services, right? So there's no point if you're a disability service provider holding your breath and waiting for that. And I think that sort of logic applies everywhere. So what can you do? What can you do where some government investment will be needed, but more modest investment, more targeted investment, smaller scale stuff that you can test and try and grow? Because if you talk to people who know, who've done the modelling in disability, for example, even if they cranked salaries up massively in that field, they forecast that they still wouldn't meet demand. It's not just about pay, it's not just about simple one-trick things. There's a whole ecosystem that needs to be responded to solve these workforce problems. Some of the things we think, though, widen the recruitment net. And there's a lot of ways you can think about this, but, you know, we're not as diverse as we might be. We have to, and again, I want to be very clear, I'm not leading one of your organisations, and I'm in no way casting aspersions on any organisation or the sector as a whole, but you've got to be open to these things and ask questions. What are our recruitment practices like? How open are we to that diverse recruitment processes? How do we position, a close friend of mine, an Aboriginal elder here, one of the things he really taught me when I worked with him as a public servant was the vital importance of senior people from different cultures in roles. That's the only way you can attract people in. If you look at the disability sector, I know the disability sector is different, they've got something like 22, 23% rate of diversity in their workforce. Now, there's reasons for that, and we know that, and we're not saying it's an apple and an apple comparison necessarily, but you can structure workforces that are much more inclusive and attract new pools of people, potentially, and retain them when they recruit them. You know, you want to see people like you in leadership roles and so forth. There's this notion of skill gaps being driven by various things, one of which is quality gaps. And again, not criticising people because there's a need to have high quality services, but sometimes even people with the right degree or the right qualifications, they'll go through a process and the organisations go, nah, they're not quite right, I can't employ them. So you run with a vacancy or something, who knows? Well, maybe we need to start thinking about, okay, maybe he's not quite right. Get them in, grow them. Now, easier said than done, I understand that. But it leads us into notions like earn and learn models. How do you start to recruit people with skills, bring them in, support them to train them on the job, redesign jobs so that they're not from day one expected to be dealing with the most complex client in the organisation, right? But you actually bring them in and tailor and shape jobs in ways that makes transition into this industry possible. This is my second last slide. So, support broadly as a concept. I mean, hello, Captain Obvious. It's one of my traits is to state the obvious, right? But we all need support in everything we do in our lives. If you're studying, you need support. Particularly if you're coming from a diverse group or a group of special, you need support to succeed in study. When you start an organisation, you can't be chucked in at the deep end. We did a great program here called SKIP. Long story short, we found that the organisations that were careful and thoughtful about, this was an earn and learn program, the organisations that were careful and thoughtful about the sort of job that you gave people from day one, they're the ones that keep their workers. I mean, surprise, surprise. You've got to be thinking about tailoring roles accordingly. And cannot overestimate the importance of better quality supervision. Again, without criticising any individual organisations or a system here. Look at reports from Uhuri. Look at reports from ACOS. Speak to anyone you know, well not anyone maybe, but many people you know I'm sure who are social workers are paying for supervision out of their own pockets. They're not earning a lot of money, but they're paying $150 a session to get some decent supervision because they don't get it at work, right? If the system is set up in such a way that supervision cannot be provided to people as just an absolute obvious thing, we've got to do something about changing the way the system runs, right? That it's so self-defeating not to have decent quality supervision, and to not invest in that concept seems almost, I mean, it's ridiculous to not invest in an area like supervision. And I should acknowledge there's some, I see Tom sitting here, there's some really great thinking going on about how, in the department, about how do we strengthen supervision programs like the CAS GP, and I think it's going to make an enormous contribution. But it's, like everything, it's probably not going to be enough. We need to be thinking about what else is there about strengthening supervision for this workforce and others. And the other final thing is just got to learn from each other. As much as this is a project that's about the specialist homelessness sector, as much as it can be, the challenges are common. The solutions are probably common. How do we actually join up across those things? Recognise our specialisations and respect those specialisations, but learn from each other as well. What do we do about tenure? Doesn't matter whether you're a mechanic, a social worker, a doctor, a politician, ideally, although you don't get it all the time, unfortunately. But you want tenure, right? People want tenure. They want to know that I'm going to be I can work here for a few years if I want to. And we need to think about funding models, that's obvious. Targeting dissatisfiers. The research we've read about the things that annoy people, the crappy admin, the stupid processes. It's not easy to fix these things. I'm not pretending it is, but we need to be zeroing in on those things. And the design of jobs. How do we help? How do we tailor jobs to people to meet their skills? That's it. If you're interested in this stuff, we've got a meeting on the roundtable planned for the 10th of September with a guy called Barry Sanderson, who's the former head of the ARHW, and he's a strong partner of WIDI. We really want to talk to people about what does this report tell us? What do we do together collectively about starting to approach some of the challenges? Because, like we said, what an awesome foundation we have in this, across this sector. It's such a waste not to capitalise on it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I've been asked to share a few reflections on that report, but I do want to say to Chris Hallekas, who took calls from me, and I can be a real pain in the neck around data. But how exactly is it, and where are we counting people from, and how are we getting just to the SHS workforce? And I think this particular data is probably the most accurate we've got in terms of specialist homelessness services and the first of its kind, so thank you for that. And the other person I want to sing out is Andrew Edgar, who runs our Learning and Development Hub, running what I call the dream team in there, which is upskilling our workers every day. So thanks for the work that you do. Sobering report, but can I say one of the biggest take-homes for me in that report is that we're losing $20 million every year. And I'm just going to be very selfish and say I don't discriminate with the specialist homelessness services. So when I heard that someone was leaving the salvos, I was sort of sad, but not so sad when I heard they were going to Ways. So as long as people are all within the big family, that was fine by me. But now, in fact, what we have is 6 out of 10 people in our workforce are leaving the specialist homelessness services and going to another sector, and they're not coming back. So that's a big problem. One of the things that we are working with the department on is how incredible it would be to spend that $20 million investing in our workforce so that we're able to retain our staff. I do think for people here who, I'm not sure if you know about the CAS GP program. Now you're really going to test me in terms of the acronym, but it's Community and Social Services graduate program, which is all about getting people in. That's great. That's half of the picture. The other half is the retention piece. And I have to say, I've sat in intake access points and seen what some of these workers are dealing with, and I couldn't do what they do. I sat for 3 hours and watched someone just having to say, I've got a really unenviable job where I have to say, do I put this woman with her kids in a rooming house that is unsafe, or do I say, just go back and stay another day in your car? You can't have workers working in that system. I want to also say that there are some positives in this, and we really want to think about those as well. And that is that we've got an incredibly skilled workforce, and that with skill and upskilling comes passion and commitment. So I'm confident that we are going to get there. And I do want to hand over, obviously, to the Minister to give us a few reflections on, A, what do you see, and 2, where to from here. And also to note that the Minister can only stay for a short period and won't be able to join us for the panel because she's got a number of time commitments today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. We are on Wurundjeri Wurrung country. I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which we gather, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and in particular I want to acknowledge any and all Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander leaders or emerging leaders who are here with us today or who are otherwise part of the specialist homelessness services sector and the provision of so much whole person, culturally safe, engaged and connected support and care for people in situations of very much intersectional disadvantage, trauma, pain and distress. So my name is Harriet. I am the Housing, Water and Equality Minister, and it is an enormous privilege to have joined so many of you, not just this week for National Homelessness Week, but as part of ongoing discussions to understand and to address the causes and the drivers of vulnerability, and also to develop and to co-design solutions which are very much part of creating something enduring that addresses and provides opportunity, that fosters and nurtures the idea of aspiration and that meets people where they are in the terms that they require. Thank you to David and to Chris and for everybody from WIDI who's worked so hard in bringing this particular piece into being. We're really proud to have been able to support this work with a shade over $300,000 in order to do it. And I'm really indebted to the people who've put in so much time and effort. And it is about making sure that what we do from here, building as it does upon many of the themes that we know and understand to be characteristics of this particular subset of social and community services sector work, is to be deployed in a way that again reduces and removes duplication wherever possible, creates those networked opportunities for people to be able to cross-refer in organic or informal processes, that also recognises the contribution in economic and interpersonal terms, in identity-related terms from people who work in the sector. And then to partner with government across all levels of government. And we know that it is local, state and Commonwealth all working together, albeit in different ways, to understand and to address the challenges that we know and that we see, albeit all too often in empirical terms, when at the heart of this it's about people. So, David, you spoke about having a background in social work and understanding from the front line what it means to engage with and to face the challenges of a sector which is all too often undervalued. And in this sense, I mean undervalued in a number of different ways. There's the economic lens, which is something which the Treasurer is obviously guided by. That is the language of fiscal management and of economic policy. It is the language of budgets and forward estimates. There is also, however, the real cost that is all too often assumed by our workforce. And I have, in a previous life, worked in and with and for the SACS sector, and I've seen firsthand the bandwidth that is required, that is assumed, that is all too often taken for granted, involving people who give in a very personalised sense, often because of lived experience, to the work that they do. I'm the daughter of a social worker who was in child protection for well over 20 years, and what I did see growing up was the impact upon teams and workforces around that need to give and the desire to give. That beyond a profession, it is considered a vocation and a set of obligations and responsibilities that are guided by identity. It's therefore all too easy for that to be assumed within the base of service delivery and of outcomes, of case management and of work that here and there relates to something that's not taken as time in lieu, that's not taken as overtime. Professional development that is assumed and undertaken in the context of supervision, David, that you touched on, that is sought in somebody's own time. This is where I think the gender lens is of particular importance. We know that SACS workers are very much overrepresented, or that women are overrepresented in the SACS workforce. The equal pay test case really brought that home a number of years ago. It led to the Equal Remuneration Order, and again this is about making sure that when we saw that uplift in wages from about 16 up to 64% of wages requiring an uplift, it was in distinct recognition of that sense of the amalgam of economic value on the one hand and that personally driven, often all too frequently gender driven approach to care. And this is where also women have the double whammy, the triple whammy, if there are intersectional lenses that apply here. Family and caring responsibilities in an unpaid sense are something which sit alongside the work in paid, albeit in too many cases underpaid, work in contribution as part of specialist homelessness services. And this is where, again, to go to the point that was raised earlier by Deb, the idea of investment is to attract and recruit, but it needs to be about retention and about development. It needs to be about not just financial considerations and a recognition through remuneration of the value of that work, but also about the reward through conditions, through favourable working environments, through the idea of a trajectory that's not punctuated by unavoidable burnout. There is a bandwidth that specialist homelessness services takes up, and all too often that's assumed voluntarily and with an awful lot of love and stamina and care and dedication and ferocity. But that's the sort of thing that often means people in this sector, as Deb said, as was borne out in this report, are leaving the sector and going somewhere else. And this is what we need to turn around and what we need to change. And it's reports like this, again, that crystallise the themes that we know and we understand anecdotally or by reference to the work that we are doing, that the broader sector is talking about, and turn that into a pipeline that actually survives changes in government, forward estimates periods, the idea of what intergenerational workforce change looks like. And the age of people in the sector, I think, reflects the energy required in order to deliver whole person support in situations often of high trauma, but also the fact that we are not retaining people later in a paid career. So there are a few things there about not just what the data tells us, but about what is missing from the next pieces about how government responds. High qualifications and skill are another example of, again, the sector receiving the benefit of that often very granular assessment and analysis that underpins real-life professional experience, but it's then about making sure there is an economic value attributed to that further work. The sector not being diverse is something that I do want to touch on. And this is where, again, I think that there are many considerations that sit well beyond the sector that have informed and influenced the barriers to diverse and to intersectional workforce development. And when we see, again, the data bears out that there is a representation of First Peoples within certain organisations, but again, that there are big gaps missing. What does it mean to make sure that it is not simply one First Nations person in an organisation? That there are support frameworks and networks that don't leave that cultural burden and that fatigue on the shoulders of one person, perhaps with intersectional experience? How do we make sure that we are addressing the value of work in a highly competitive workforce environment? We have many sectors competing against each other for people to come into them. And this is where, again, we need to have that opportunity to attract diversity in our workforces so that, again, people who are accessing those services are finding cultural safety and common ground, whether that's through multicultural engagement, through interfaith engagement, whether that's to overcome the tyranny of distance. And we know that these problems are amplified the further away from Melbourne that you go. This is where, again, when we have targeted supports and approaches like the graduate programs, like the work that we do within and across Homes Victoria, including with targets and with supports through the investments we've made, we can talk at a government level around the support and around the millions of dollars. There's $197 million extra in this year's budget for homelessness supports and responses. But unless we target that into ways that make a difference, a seismic change that is enduring, then we will be pouring money into a bucket that has holes in it that shouldn't be there. And they shouldn't be there in a way that is carried by workers across the sector. That exhalation that, oh, somebody's left, that means there's 25% more work that has to be carried by a small team, and that 25% of work can't go undone because we know the people or we know the circumstances, and we are therefore committed to being there and absorbing that work. So quality service delivery, and that's a very sort of jargonistic term, is about being guided by the sort of data that this report brings to bear. It's an important way for us, again, in an evidence-based policy environment, to be able to zero in on empirical information that not only helps to guide policy, but that justifies investment. Because again, when we're talking about that synthesis of economic and fiscal value and decision-making in a budgetary sense, when we in Victoria are talking about advocating to the Commonwealth around funding through its budget, leaning into specific and vulnerable cohorts, we need to be able to show that we are doing this work and we understand the statistical underpinnings that inform our priorities. It's also of crucial importance that as we look at the evolution of specific cohorts in overrepresentation across homelessness populations, we have a workforce that is able to reflect those needs in a sense that leans into, for example, the youth cohort, older women, First Nations folks. Targets are important, but workforce and the reflection of self in accessing services is so important as well, as much as anything, because it then means we're lessening the burden on those people who are otherwise carrying this weight as one of 100 or two of 100 in a workforce. So I want to say thank you to everybody who has been part of this work. I'm not sure how much work went on behind the scenes. I can only imagine the dedication and the care involved in treating data carefully and in understanding where and how we go from here. But we are really proud to support this work. I'm really determined to make sure that it is put to good use, but that it's done so in partnership with the sector. So thank you to Council for Homeless Persons for also being part of what this work involves and engages. I've talked at length in every forum I've had as Housing Minister since taking the portfolio last year about the need for uncomfortable conversations. And to my mind, these conversations are better and more important. They should be more uncomfortable because of the provision of data upon which there are solid bases to inform funding decisions and priorities over time. So well done to everybody who's been involved. I look forward to the work continuing. I know it is exhausting work in a sector which is already exhausted, and again, I think there is merit in looking at the impact of frontline service delivery as a result of the pandemic, as a result of that amplification of need in situations where trauma often caused people with little option other than, for example, Deb, to sleep in the car another night or to stay in a situation of violence or of injury or of coercive control. This work goes on. It's not going anywhere in terms of a set of needs. We just need to make sure that as governments we're able to respond, and this is a vital tool in being able to do exactly that. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Minister. I'm going to invite our frontline workers to be part of the panel discussion to tell us what their experience is on the front line. So Launch, Ways and Salvos are bringing us that experience firsthand. So if I can invite you to come to the panel. Thank you.
Okay. Hello everyone, my name's Lauren Crawford. I'm the Initial Support Service Manager at Launch Housing.
Hi everyone, I am Millie or Amelia. I'm the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander IAP worker at the West Metro Homelessness Service in Sunshine. And sitting here today, I'd like to also acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, on whose beautiful land we are gathering, and pay my respects to elders past and present.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I work at Ways in Dandenong and I'm an initial assessment planner. Nice to see you all.
Thank you all for coming. And I thought I might just kick off and ask the question in relation to what are the challenges that you're having day to day in relation to the work that you do as part of the front line?
Talking to me? Yeah. Okay. So the challenge is that when I started at WIDI a year and a half, I feel as if the clients that are coming through, it's doubled, and not meeting the needs of the clients anymore. It's almost like there's no solution, and you can just basically give them the spiel that we have to do every day. This is what you need to do, and this is what you need to do. And the hard part is seeing these clients in tears, you know, hearing that a car is a home. It really breaks your heart. And for initial assessment planner, it's crisis, so we're not supposed to be case managers, but at times, because there's not enough hands, we need to be case managers at the same time and reach that certain number of clients that we need to meet per day. It is very challenging that at times, I know I'm guilty and I've been told, have your tea break, Charlotte, or it's time to go home now, Charlotte. It's hard, it's really hard, and seeing the workers, the team that we work with, how stressed they are at the same time with trying to keep it up. And then seeing the clients so vulnerable in the waiting time. It used to be like callback would be 24 to 48 hours. It's going to 72 hours now. That's if we can. For example, yesterday, the doors weren't closed. We tried to meet the clients where they were at coming through, giving them the housing information and telling them that we are up to full capacity. That gave us time to catch up on the booklets of clients that we needed to catch up with. Starting the job a year and a half ago, I felt that I could give my 100% to each client. But now with the influx of clients that are coming through and the needs for housing and that, it's almost like I for myself cannot give 100% because it's next. The case management side of things is it's not just like a 15-minute process with a client. So these are vulnerable people that have needs, and they're not wants, they're needs. It can be like a continuous, so say for instance I have 6 clients in the day, I still have other clients from last week that I'm following up and trying to keep that workload. And one of the things that I realised that this job's been getting a little bit tough is when I get home, and I have a single daughter who's at home with my grandchildren, so they're 7 and 8, and I know it's tough for her as well. She says, Mum, you need to give up this job. You look exhausted. You look exhausted. But for me personally, I love people, I love community, I love the vulnerable, because I always have, yet that could have been me, coming from an experience in my own life. It's tough. It's tough at times, and there is, I have to be honest, there is sometimes if I didn't have a faith, there's times I wake up in the morning and I think of a client. Oh, I could have done that, I could have done this, I could have done that. But the time factor is exhausting, and it does, 5 days a week, it just does take a toll on you. That my sad days now I basically just lounge all day and try and catch up on everything on a Sunday. And then it's Monday again. Yeah, but yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Charlotte. Millie, do you want to give us a few of your reflections?
I definitely resonate with what Charlotte has said. I also work full-time in the client-facing role. I wanted to reflect what you said about, we're not case managers, we are interim response support. However, what we struggle with at times is a very large wait time for case management to be available. Yeah. And so we often are overworking or overreaching the boundaries of our role to support clients in sometimes their largest time of need or crisis, because there is such that large waiting period between our intake assessment period and actually having ongoing casework where you can meet all those different needs. I think it definitely is hard. It's a hard role. I know in our office, other caseworkers and stuff say, you know, you've got the hardest job in the building. But I also think we are so blessed to be able to sit and hold space with people and listen to people. Something we do a lot in our team is really focus on, you know, whether there's limits on accommodation that can be provided or flaws in housing options like unsafe rooming houses as mentioned, or lack of options, or people sleeping in their cars. Where was I going? But I think as much as we are limited, we strongly focus on at least listening to people as they are coming, seeing people as they are and being person-centred, hearing what they really need and where they're at, and looking at it holistically. So, yeah, when we can't always meet their practical physical housing need, as many referrals as possible for like mental health, physical health, community, social connection, all of those kind of things, linking people in with support, and being strengths-based, looking at what they already have, where they are strong and building on that, or what, you know, if we can't, you know, have a housing outcome, at least linking in with other supports in the meantime while they're waiting for that support. I think, you know, I also have experienced my partner looking at me when I come home at the end of the day and saying, you need to leave this. It's, you know, but I think what helps me get through is I have a lot of support to attend lots of upskilling opportunities and training opportunities. And I find whenever I, especially through Counsel to Homeless Persons, whenever I attend a training, it like reignites the passion and fire within myself. It grounds myself. I find I'm continually learning and, yeah, grounding myself within the work that I do. And so I'm very supported by Salvos in being able to attend those. We have, like, you know, employee support programs and stuff that we do use and we do encourage our teams to use because it is hard work. I think what I've seen a lot is definitely the high turnover and losing staff and having to step up to fill the needs. You know, my role specifically was created in partnership with Salvation Army West Metro Homelessness Service and a local Aboriginal community-controlled organisation, because there was a need in community. We had a lot of mob in the West facing homelessness, living without a home or at risk of that, and going to the local ACO, but the ACO not actually being funded to support that or having any resources to support that, or even knowing how to access the local access point, or having barriers in accessing the access point. It's a half an hour drive from the town I live to work, and there's no, you know, base in that town. So there's a lot of different barriers, and so this role was created so I could sit both in the entry point in the IAP team, but also sit in the ACO in the other kind of area within our catchment that we work in, to provide culturally safe support, and to meet the needs of the people that were missing out, if that makes sense. So I think that's very special. However, there has been a lot of turnover and short staffing in our entry point team, where I have actually had to step up and really support just anyone coming through the doors, whether they were Indigenous or not, or an alien, like, you know, anyone that came through. We all kind of step up as a team and support each other and do as much as we can to support everyone. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Millie. That sounds like you've got a very supportive team there. And Lauren, would you like to share some of your views and reflections?
I don't currently work with clients, but I'm the manager of our 3 access points located in Cheltenham, St Kilda and Collingwood. Do you want to swap? Oh, yes. Is that better? There we go. I'll start again. I am the service manager of our 3 access points that we have in Cheltenham, Collingwood and St Kilda. And what sits behind that is our HSA team, which is housing, support and allocation. Do all of our prioritisation. So I'm here today to speak on behalf of the teams that I manage. I don't work with clients, but I work out of our sites every day. So I see the same thing. I started at launch in 2007 as an IEP worker, so a really long time ago. And since then, obviously, I've seen, housing options start declining. So we have to think about the reason why people want to work in this industry is because they want to help people. So the pressure points of IAP are the same for us as well. We don't have any housing options. So you have to think about the number of contacts we're having with clients every day. We have up to 150 contacts with clients each day, and we don't have a lot to offer. So often we can find a rooming house in Frankston for the person in front of us, but that person has their links and support services in the city. And when we think about what people are on with their income, they can't afford that rooming house anyway, plus afford the cost of living. So as a result of that, not having any options, our teams are forced to say to people every day, over and over and over again, we can't help you today. So when we think about the impact that has on our staff in IAP, them leaving at the end of the day and being so heightened because there's been an increase in OVA, so the number of sort of incidents that are happening because our clients are frustrated because we don't have options, our teams are going home at the end of the day really heightened and stressed and not being able to participate in their own life, So we've got feedback from teams as well saying that I couldn't play with my kids when I got home because I was so exhausted from work and I was ruminating about what happened during the day. So when we think about this in IAP, if our staff are doing this every single day, we often have 30 or 40 people lining up on the footpath each day waiting for us to open. And the pressure that creates with teams sets the tone for the rest of the day. The reason why people work in these roles is because we are compassionate and we want to help people. So when people come in for help, we want to give them as much time as they need to sit down and listen and keep them at the centre of the picture. But we're looking at the clock going, I can only give you 15 minutes because I've got 30 more people to see. And you think about the tension and the ethical dilemma that causes for our staff who came into this industry because they want to help people. It's not long before all of those pressures build up and then they decide to leave for another role. And we're often having fresh grads come into the IAP space, which is also, great, but at the same time can be really difficult because they haven't built up that resilience yet to figure out how to have that correct work-life balance. So we can talk more later about sort of job redesign, but I just resonate with what you're saying around the differences in IAP now, to 5, 10, 15 years ago when we used to have options to offer. It's significantly changed, and when we think about clients waiting to go into crisis facilities, right now there's over 1,000 people waiting for one of our rooms at one of our crisis facilities. So triaging and prioritising one person to get that vacancy, that means that other people are either couch surfing or sleeping rough or just have to kind of be on their own. So IAP are at the cold face of that every day, and when you think about IAP staff who constantly have that pressure on them versus other staff in other programs who are working with clients who are already housed. We have a lot of people who start in IAP and then move on to other programs within launch, and they openly feedback that the pressure in their new role working with a client who's already housed, it doesn't even compare because we're constantly in that churn of crisis. So yeah, it's really difficult, and I agree. I think IAP workers have, if not, the hardest job of everyone because we can't predict in the IAP space what's going to happen every day. So in a lot of other case management programs, other staff members can kind of manage their time for their day. In IAP, you don't know what's going to happen or what we've got or what we can leverage to respond. And working under that pressure is really, really taxing for IAP. Yeah, so I agree with what you said.
Thank you so much to Lauren, Millie and Charlotte for sharing the incredible challenges that you have every day. This doesn't seem to work, does it? When I'm loud enough. Right. So thank you for sharing the challenges that you're experiencing every day. But more importantly, thank you for the work that you do to get the outcomes in what is an incredibly challenging environment. So can we thank our frontline workers? Each of you have got senior responsibilities for your workforce every day, and you've heard the challenges that people and your workforce are facing. What are the kinds of things that you're seeing in terms of, with the WIDI report, we heard that there is a huge turnover, 6 out of 10 people are leaving. So do you have that retention problem in your service, and what sorts of things are you doing to address it? We'll start with you, Molly.
Thanks, Deb. Hi, everyone. I'm Molly from VincentCare. I know many people in the room know me. So, yeah, those stats pretty much track with our organisational statistics on turnover and retention. One thing that occurred to me that may well be in the WIDI report but wasn't mentioned today is the impact on our short-term funding. So in many of our programs, we might have a program that's funded for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and then we can only offer our teams that length of certainty, and that kind of uncertainty for entire teams, including the leadership of those teams, has a really distinct impact on the retention rate for those staff members.
Yeah. And how about you? Thank you, Molly. Peter?
Yes, thank you. Good to see everyone here. So my name is Peter McGrath. I'm the State Manager for the Salvation Army Homelessness Services in Victoria. It's interesting, last year I was doing a work with our HR team, and for the 3 years between 2020 to 2022 it tracks, we had 25% turnover across those 3 years. And so that was a bit concerning, sort of coming in and seeing that it's actually representing there. And of course, sort of what we need to now do is, and what we're doing now is trying to look at those kind of programs and systems that can actually stop that trend, to actually start to reduce and actually do better in terms of both recruitment and retention. So again, we'll talk a bit later, but yeah, no, we're seeing that trend.
Okay, and Wayne?
Hi everyone, Wayne from Ways. For us, we're on a bit of the flip side. So when I started with the organisation 2 years ago, we had turnover of around 33%, but we've got it down to 12% at the moment, which is fantastic. But we're on that kind of precipice every single day of things going wrong and people leaving en masse because of the demand coming through the service. And so we've put in place a whole range of things around, staff wellbeing and lunches and breakfasts and all these sorts of pieces to just offer that kind of extra layer of kind of the nice pieces that people enjoy. We have fruit toast and crumpets. I know it's very basic, but at least once a week in the office, and that smell that comes out from good fruit toast is enough to help people go, oh, that reminds me of, and it brings back good feelings. And they're very small things, but they're really important things to recognise that everyone comes with the experiences of their own life, and what brings joy to people is different across different spaces. And so everyone in the workforce is here because they want to make a difference in people's lives. What can we do additionally besides offering a really safe workspace to keep them at work? And so, having a workforce that is all leadership across the organisation that I work within has got a background in client service delivery, which I think is really, really important to understand, to know what staff are going through each and every day, and to step in and support staff in those times of need. So there's been times when myself and the other executives have said to the team, step away, we've got this, because it's just too stressful. And for them to know that we've got their back, we can step in, we can support, it's a really, really important piece. Do we do it as good? Not at all, but we do offer and step in and hold that space so they can step aside, do debriefing, do reflective practice, do supervision, do all those really, really important things that keep staff wanting to be at work. Right. So I think that's a big focus.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty extraordinary, can I say, to get from 28% down to 12%. So
I think we're lucky as well. We're a regional service as well, so we focus on a specific space. KCK and Dandenong Frankston. So our staff are local staff. They're local to the space. They work within the area that they support, and they want to make a difference. And so I think that's a big piece as well. And cost of living increase, I think, is another layer which is keeping people in jobs longer than they probably would stay if the cost of living wasn't an impact. And so I am concerned about the future when things settle down. What does that look like for the workforce when they've got more opportunity and not reliant on their work as much as they are right now? So I think that's another layer to think about for the future.
That's true. So I guess my question is, we always like to have a strengths-based approach. We know what the challenges are. In terms of the solutions, if you had to think of one or two things that would make a difference, what would you be lobbying government to do to support the workforce in your team?
Well, I think that the previous panel talked really eloquently about the stresses in everyday work, but also talked about the impact of training and support, particularly the CHP, SHS training calendar, which I do think makes a difference to retention in our sector because it offers something to people.
Yeah.
So
sorry, Molly, are you telling DFFH to continue to fund and
I'm using it as a good example. I'm not lobbying but I am saying that I think that training and support programs that are broader than just one organisation, that are sector-wide, are really effective. And I do think that that's something that we should look at to do more.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Peter?
One or two.
One or two, yeah, not 5 or 6.
Okay.
It's got a big list here.
I've got a whole paper. No, look, and again, I want to appreciate, obviously, and thank you, Millie, who's come here. Millie is an example of a creative solution because, again, for so long, and the Salvation Army is a big organisation, and we're a big faith-based organisation, and there's challenges to that. Because of the history of the organisation, that's something we have to face every day. There's challenges in terms of working with diversity, which I think has been part of the internal solutions about how do we face that, how do we deal with it, how do we work on that. So I think there's been some really good things that we've looked at. And as a big organisation, there's probably a benefit of being able to absorb the costs of that. And I think there'll be different challenges. I think it's interesting when you said the target report was around small and medium organisations. And small and medium organisations may not have the resources that can absorb as a big organisation. And that really is a significant piece. So for us, we're really fortunate. We have a National Aboriginal Territory Unit, which is a national unit that supports the development. They've got a really good focus. So in terms of that, they've been looking at developing any of our employees that have an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander background. So we're fortunate as an organisation that that unit has been developed over the last 3 to 5 years, is really driving that and supporting, obviously, for myself, Victorian Homelessness, about how do we develop new roles, how do we actually engage appropriately with the community, how do we then reshape those roles to actually fit to what the community needs and still provide the service that we're funded to do. So we're fortunate to have those resources. I think other organisations, may need to sort of, how do we tap into what's existing in the system for that. I think probably the thing for us is also, and again, I come back to the IAP workload. Obviously, the Salvation Army have a number of them. We also have St Kilda's after-hours service. And that service is absolutely under pressure all the time. We get more than 46,000 calls a year in the after-hours alone across the state. And it's really hard because as a local service, you're dealing with what's there right in your face. But St Kilda, it's like, well, someone's ringing for Warrnambool, and I'm trying to coordinate something at 1 o'clock in the morning for something in Warrnambool, and the motels, there's none there. So again, it's that real pressure point for that. And I think for us, it's around how do we look at rewarding those staff members. So an IP staff member, when someone walks in the door, they need to be family violence trained and orientated because they need to, hang on, they need to be mental health trained and orientated because that could happen. Hang on, they need to deal with substance abuse issues. Hang on, it could be. The specialisation of that role is pretty much what we want to focus on, and that again comes back to how do we actually remunerate that with the SHADS award to the level that makes them want to stay in that role. And so probably that's one of the drafters in terms of what I would like, is looking at the cost per price of these kind of roles that, to my mind, really are specialist, and how do we look at that negotiation? There's been some work done by the department. Great that the guidelines are being updated. We're looking forward to those. Fabulous that the activities are now going to be more reflective of what we need, and we've done some work around the commitment IDs. I think the next stage is how do we look at that cost price index that then allows us to fund staff to the best level consistently so that we can create that retention ability.
Yeah, that sounds great. And Wayne, what are your key top priorities moving forward?
So number one is the recognition that trauma is a huge impact in the space that we work within, and ensuring that the workforce has what they need to succeed. So, like I mentioned before, people come with their own life experiences. Every single one of us has an experience in our life that has set us up for where we are and what we're doing moving forward. And I think having the right setup for well-being, recognition of trauma in the lives of people we're supporting is really, really important. And so having that supervision, debriefing, reflective practice, all those multiple pieces that you need at different times of the day, supported to be in organisations through a trauma-informed lens, I think is really, really important. You know, yes, we need more housing, yes, we need more staff and all those sorts of pieces, but number one now, we need to look after the people we've got, give them what they need to be successful and succeed, and really, really strengthen those pieces there, because right now, that's what we should be doing, is that really clear focus on that piece.
Great. I'm being told that I haven't done so good with timing. I've got to wrap it up. Okay. So that people can actually eat and have the lunch that's been served. I want to thank you all, because I know it's very hard to lead organisations that are under stress. We've got finite resources and the needs are really huge, but I know that all of your organisations do everything you can to support your workforce. So thanks for being here and contributing to the discussion today. And that'll wrap it up.